Well, I just want to reiterate again just how grateful I am to get to know you, Kurt, and just over the year or so that I've gotten to know you. Actually, I was kind of right in the middle of in a coaching training program myself, and getting coached by you this past year, and we really became friends. And I'm just super grateful for your friendship. And for me personally, just in my whole journey with coaching in this past year, I've just found it to be something that has really helped me to stay in my lane, and just to really gain confidence of the gifts that I feel like I have been given, and just learning how to better align my life with those gifts and with those skills. And I'm just really appreciative of the guidance and just the coaching that I've received from you. And just to go into a little bit of your background. So you have a background in spiritual healing, in spiritual direction, and then also in coaching. And
Yes.
you were just telling me about how these are the things you offer, and you want those things to not be seen as a title that you have necessarily, but just, gifts that you really feel like the Lord has given you to bless people, which you certainly have blessed me. And you're a shepherd of people, and you're a pastor. And so, just with all of those experiences, first of all, just what gravitated you towards coaching, and how has it impacted your life?
Well, first, let me say it's a privilege to be to do this with you, and I'm excited. I mean, I feel really honored that you asked
Mm.
me to be the first in in the series of just talking to people that have invested in you. So that's a high honor for me. And if anyone's listening and you don't know Sarah, let me tell you, this is this person that you are that I'm talking to right now, that you are getting to hear from, is amazing.
Mm.
So, just being on this with you is absolutely an honor and a privilege. And I would say everything that you said about me, of us getting to become friends this year, and everything that you feel like you've received from me, I would say the same thing back.
Mm.
That it's been just, I've received so much from you in this year, and just knowing you is just a joy.
Mm.
So, as far as the question, what got me into coaching? I had done, I previously had done a 2-year certification program for spiritual direction. What spiritual direction is simply learning to be present to God's presence in the present. That's the way I say it. It's really about present, being aware of yourself. Like, what am I really thinking right now? What am I really feeling? Becoming more self-aware. And in that process of becoming more self-aware, you are also practicing surrendering yourself to God, so you can be very aware of where He is meeting you and how He is speaking to you. At the time that I ended up stepping into also a certification program for coaching, for life coach, I was preparing to, I had been in ministry, vocational ministry, for years, and we were shifting how we were doing things in our church community. And I was looking at a new way of doing things that wouldn't necessarily bring in a lot of revenue. What came out was this, I happened to be coming back from doing a wedding for a guy I had poured into and invested in, what in churchies we call discipleship. Um, I had been investing in him for years, and I got to do his wedding. I got to officiate his wedding,
Mm.
and as I was coming back, a friend of mine who happened to be going through certification for life coaching called me and asked to talk. And as we were talking, she was just telling me about what she was going through, everything that was happening. And in the middle of that, I was like, I just thought, wow, this is weird. I've been praying and asking God, like, how do I sustain my family in this new way of ministry? And here you're talking about investing in people, life coaching, investing in people, which is what I love to do. And it just struck me as like, this could be God giving me an opening and an avenue to pursue. And so I asked her to set me up with the guy who ran the whole organization. His name is Jeff Caliguire, who's written books on life coaching, who runs transformational life coaching, I believe is, if I remember that correctly. If I got it wrong, sorry, Jeff. But he's amazing. So that's how I got into it. But in the end, for me personally, it became another ministry. It became another way of just listening to people. Unlike spiritual direction, which is focused on the present, life coaching is focused on the future. How do I help you move from here to there? And so for me, you mentioned deep healing. It is also about the past. So about helping people heal from past wounds. So I feel like what God has given me is amazing gifts to help people in each of those areas, past, present, and future, which is, as human beings, this is where we struggle, right? With the past, the present, and the future.
Awesome. Yeah, and through our conversations, I've just gotten to hear about, even recently, just with your new church movement and what you're pastoring, and just how you've implemented the coaching techniques into those discipleship groups. So maybe just talk a little bit about what are some of those techniques that you use just on a a practical basis within that group setting.
Well, here's what's interesting about all of it. Spiritual direction is about listening deeply to the other person as you listen deeply to what's happening in you and what's being triggered. And then basically offering both of those things to God, what the other person's saying, what they're not saying, what you're hearing between the words,
Right.
and what's happening in you, and then allowing God to speak into that. So it's about listening, and life coach is about listening and pulling the gold out of people, right? It's about calling the beauty and the power that people don't even know they have in them. Our ministry that we offer is what we just call discipleship training school. And it's a discipleship training school where we're training people to listen to God, to listen to themselves, to listen to other people, and then offer, not just listen and receive and hear, but also give what they're hearing and seeing. And so we spend 2 hours every Sunday afternoon, so that we're not here to compete with any church community. So we do it in the afternoons. We read a passage, a short passage, nothing more than like 15 verses at the most. We'll read the passage together. And then once we read it, we pray out of it. So here's the practicing of listening right there. Now we're sitting with the passage and really listening for how God is speaking to us. And then whatever we're sensing, we now pray out loud together for each other, for our county. Then the next hour is taking that same scripture that we just prayed for an hour with, and now just asking for questions. What did you notice about God? And letting everyone share. What did you notice about God? What did you notice about people? How are you going to obey this week what you just discovered? And who are you going to share it with? And before those last two questions, the third and fourth question, we actually stop again and say, we don't need to figure out how to obey this, and we don't need to figure out who to share it with. we're going to stop and ask God those questions.
Mm.
God, how do we obey what we discovered in this coming week? And then we sit in silence for 2 minutes. We set an alarm and we sit in silence for 2 minutes and let people just listen. And whatever comes up, they write it down. And then the same thing when we do, who do we share it with? What we discovered, because one of the things in Revelation 12 that says that how we defeat the enemy is that we share our story, our testimony, we share what we're experiencing. Right. And so those are the two things we do. And I've had moments where, as we were doing, okay, God, as we did the prayer time, who do I share this with, and sit in silence for 2 minutes again. There was one week I had like the image, I couldn't see the person clearly, but in my imagination, I saw a bald person. And then that week, 2 people reached out to me who I know, who both have, struggles follically. And and both asked, Kurt, I need your help.
Wow.
So, yeah. And I want to make clear here, there's going to be people who are listening to this, I'm sure, who are not Christ followers like me, who believe things differently than I do. So anything I'm sharing here, I just want to make it clear. I have no expectations. When I talk about sharing our stories are powerful things. And I'm here to just share my journey. This is what I'm experiencing and where I'm at now. And if you talked to me a year ago, it would have been different. And where I'm going to be in a year, I don't know. This is where I am right now. All I have to offer anyone is what God has given me and in these experiences. So that's all. As we talk, all I'm doing is sharing my story and my journey. And as you talk to other people, they will do the same. So I hope, and my desire is no one feels threatened by this. And they're just willing to listen and take what works for them where they are and leave the rest.
Definitely. Yeah. My passion really is, right now, I feel the most confident with coaching individuals in their 20s. And, that's where I am too. So I'm right there with everyone. But I think something unique where coaching is really beneficial for my generation is just this. It seems like there's this unprecedented amount of freedom that we have. And there's just so many different opportunities we have at our fingertips that I think there just comes this tendency to compare ourselves to other people because we're seeing what other people are doing more than we ever have before. And something that I think our generation really needs as well is just this ability to really learn how to listen to people better. I think there's just a little bit of a lack of being able to or being willing to really connect with people and just to listen and to have conversation where we know how to listen rather than just saying what's on our mind. And so I know that you have had just so much experience with listening and talking to so many people of different faiths, of different walks of life, just being a pastor and just being a shepherd of people. And so what are some tools or maybe some ways that you've found that are helpful just to better listen to people?
Yeah, I think it always starts with us, right? Personally, it starts with understanding how safe I am with God. And there's a passage in Matthew 11, which is one of the accounts of Jesus's life, one of 4 accounts. And in it, Jesus says, "Come to me, all you who are weary and heavy burdened, and I will give you rest, for I am gentle and humble in heart." And that's such a powerful passage for me because, one, it makes it very clear from Jesus's perspective who gets to come to him. What's the minimum requirements for anyone to come to Jesus? Are you weary? Are you heavy burdened? In other words, have you been born? Because there isn't anyone who doesn't feel weary or burdened at times. I would say that's me most every day. And so there's an invitation. Why can we trust him that he wants us to come to him and be honest with him about our things that are weighing us down? And he says, because he's gentle and he's humble. When we are around gentle people and humble people, don't we feel safe to just be us and say what's on our mind? The longer we are around those people, the safer we feel, and the more we open up and be us. And so that's critical for me to understand that, I've been following Jesus for a long, long time. And yet it's only been in the last 3 years that I've really found, really honed in on that. And so this is where it really listening to other people and also resisting the need to compare myself to other people comes in. And so the conviction of God is so different from human conviction. Like in terms of convicting somebody, God's conviction to me looks like this now. Can I carry that for you? Look at what you're carrying that you don't need to carry. Those hopes and dreams, let me carry them for you. You're wearing yourself out wrestling over this issue. It all starts there. If I trust that God is gentle and humble and safe, and wants me to share honestly and vulnerably with him what I'm struggling with so that he can take it off my shoulders and carry it for me, I don't need to be envious of somebody else.
Totally.
And I think another thing in our culture that's interesting is with all these choices comes analysis paralysis. There's too many choices and they overwhelm us, right?
Yes.
It's great to have choices, but they can overwhelm us. And this is also where learning to be present to God and ourselves comes in, because I've said this, we are people who only live now. That narrows things down. If we really just become present to what we're thinking and feeling, we can relax knowing that God is safe, and we can just relax and go, okay, this is what I'm thinking, God, this is what I'm feeling. I'm going to hand those over to you. Now I can really be present to another human being. When you're confessing things and being honest about where you're at, there's just this relief that takes a weight off of you and allows you then to be more present to what's happening in around you. If we will do that, then we can really listen deeply to another person and not carry their stuff. And we're practicing giving God our stuff, being honest about ourselves. And if you don't follow Jesus, just be honest, about what you're going through. And I would say practice, just be literally in your imagination, practice holding that out and dropping it. That allows you to receive what another person is hearing, what they're saying, listening to them, and then also hold that out and drop it.
And through that process too, you even are inviting that other person to share. You're increasing the likelihood of them being able to dump out whatever's weighing them down. And as they do that, you're also in a much better state to encourage them, because you're not worried about, like something they say and, oh, wow, they must, they're doing better at that in life than I am, or whatever that jealous or envious thought is. You can push that aside and instead encourage them. And more often than not, they're probably feeling jealous or envious of you in a way that you probably didn't see. And I think just the importance of learning how to listen to other people, it just couldn't be more important to know how to do and to have that as a skill. And even just in research I've done too, like today in this day and age, we are in, I think that it's an epidemic of loneliness. I think that's the right term. But essentially, our whole entire world, I know for sure in the US, so maybe I shouldn't say the entire world, but I know in the US for sure, we're experiencing unprecedented levels of people being lonely. And I think part of that is probably from COVID and the just the
Mhm.
post-COVID world, and man, how much impact that time had on all of us. But just to have these skills to know that more likely than not, a few people that you interact with on a daily basis, those people are probably lonely and probably a lot more lonely than you would think.
Yeah, I would say the killer from at every standpoint, whether spiritually or not, is isolation is the killer.
Mm,
And
yeah,
we can be in a crowded room with people and still feel isolated and lonely.
mm,
And this is why,
totally.
yeah, and this is why vulnerability is literally the superpower.
Mm,
Because if you said it, like humans are, we're kind of a contagious people, right? It's not just, you mentioned COVID, it's not just like these biological um, things that become contagious, but it's also our attitude. And when
yeah,
we choose vulnerability, even risking, people may even make fun of us in a moment, but if we continue to practice vulnerability, other people will catch it. What is leadership? How do we define it? I define it in just two I words: influence and initiative. When I take the initiative to be vulnerable and humble and be honest with how I'm feeling and struggling, even the ugly stuff, that creates influence and other
mm,
people respond.
mm, yeah, I really appreciate that you mentioned those words, and I think influence even in our generation has a different term now because of, the influencers that we look at on social media, and even like my own picture of influence is associated with with money and with followers, like with just it's I think of it as being like known by so many people. And so I think even in my own just journey of starting this coaching business, and even in this podcast and writing blogs, I often find that I'm like worrying about who's going to hear this, how many people am I going to reach, and I can get really stuck in those anxious thoughts.
Yeah.
And
Yes.
that's just totally the opposite, I think, of what real influence is. And it's a lot less stressful and a lot easier to look at it as just one-on-one interactions with people, and being open and being humble, just being a humble person. And yeah, I just think that's a really interesting, um, an interesting struggle that that we deal with now.
Henry Nouwen wrote a book, and I'm trying to remember. Suddenly, oh, the Wounded Healer.
Mm,
And in his book, he describes a generation that's fatherless, wounded, and in their woundedness, lashing out like a wounded animal, right?
mm.
In their anger, lashing out to everyone around them. Sound familiar? Fatherless, wounded, angry generation. I think it describes pretty much every generation here in the West since he wrote that book. But he wrote it in the 70s, and he said, here's the only person who will have influence with that generation: someone who's willing to navigate their own inner wilderness,
Mm,
someone who is willing to be honest with themselves and with God and with others, who is willing to not be afraid to face the things inside, the negativity, the fear, the shame, the anxiety, the depression, the worry, and the fear, to face that, name it, call it out, and learn to surrender it. That is the person who then who has walked through that wilderness, that can now say, I've been there.
Yeah.
That's real influence. And I would say you are one of those people on that journey. You are a great listener. You are honest. You are growing in your vulnerability. And I would highly endorse anyone who is looking for someone who will listen deeply to another human being and allow them to be seen and heard. Sarah, you're one of those people who, you're gold.
Thank you. I don't feel deserving of those words, but I really, yeah, I really appreciate you. I really appreciate you saying that. And I just truly am so grateful for how God put you in my life at this time, and for just all the conversations we've had, where I've felt very listened by you, and you've just asked me very powerful questions. Even the other day, of just questioning a phrase I said where I was, saying I need to do this, and you just kind of called me out on it, and and asked me, is that essentially, is that a gracious mindset? Is that the mindset that God would want you to have towards yourself? Because truly, He wants us to give it up to Him, to let Him carry it for us. And so it just totally erases that anxiousness and that the perfectionist in me to to be so worried and so stuck on if I did something right, or just to be worried on needing to do something right in the future. So
As finite creatures, when are we ever going to have everything together? Right? Our problem as humans is we desperately want to be fully complete within ourselves. This is a desperate desire. And this is, for me, the only place that I understand, that I've found what works for me. And this is what works for me. Again, this is my journey. The only thing I've found that works is understanding God is the one who's infinite and He's complete. And He offers Himself to us to clothe us in His completeness, so that we don't have to be complete. And I find my biggest problems are when I can't accept that I'm finite. When I have to prove myself that I've got it together, and I fight to put on this, and it is an illusion that I'm complete. I'm going to be a student for the rest of my life, because there's never a moment where I'm going to be complete. So I'm always growing, which is exciting if you think of it that way. To just stop trying to be Kurt, stop trying to appear like you've got it all together, and accept your finiteness. What that does is allow me to go, from God's point of view, that's a good thing. He created us that way. I look at the future and go, God has so much more to give me and show me and reveal to me. And I have more to experience. It's such a shift to be a student.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for sharing all of those just really, really great points just to sit with and to just change our minds, and to have more graciousness towards ourselves.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask you about just a little bit about what is your book going to be about that you are in the process of writing, and it's going to be titled The Way of the Open Hand. Is that right?
Yes. Yes, the way of the open hand. And it is really everything we've been talking about, of living an open life, holding out our hands and allowing God to give and take away as he chooses, because he knows what's best for us. And the open life, like you think again, hand, which of these two positions with our hand is the better one? Right? So closed is just all about fighting. And closed is really miserable experienced. And that again, this is isolation. This is me against the world. This is an exciting thing, because that now I can hold other people's hands and I can receive and I can give. So it's a hand of receiving. It's also a hand of blessing. And I find that when we are open to receiving from God, he gives us more than we can just handle ourselves, in a good way, that it overflows. So the more I receive, the more I reflect. The more I receive his patience, the more I reflect it. The more I receive his love, the more I reflect it. If we can learn slowly to give ourselves to others without expecting anything in return, that's the place of freedom. The minute we have an expectation that if we do this for someone, we give ourselves away, that we'll get this in return, we are now a slave. When we hold our hands open, this works. Whether you believe in God or not, try it, and it works, because even practicing these things, I believe God, who he is he hardwired his character into the creation, and its truth is written in there. And one of those things is his generosity. And it's literally a law in the creation. And so you don't have to believe in God. I'm just telling you, this stuff works. Like, I'm just like, it works. I've been, like I said, my coaching, right? I thought it was going to be my business model, and it became my ministry. And what I mean by that is I don't charge anyone anything. They come to me, anyone comes to me and asks, okay, I'm interested in you as a coach, as a spiritual director, for helping me with these things that you offer: coaching, spiritual direction, deep healing. How much do you charge? And I say, I don't charge anything. Here's what I would say. And this is the only time in this, we do a consultation. And I said, this is the only time I'm going to bring this up. And it's up to you from here. I would ask you to consider, and if they're a Christ follower, to pray about donating to our church community and the initiatives that we're doing to serve other people, the whole organization. If you consider it and decide to do it, great. If you consider it and don't decide to do it, great. I'm here and I offer my services to you. If this chemistry works out, like, again, there are, 3 things that you always consider when connecting with an organization or other people: is character, competence, chemistry. So if this works out for you, you feel connected to my character, you feel I'm competent, and there's a chemistry here, I'm in, whether you give or not. And I can tell you, Sarah, why this works, because I have been living that way for almost 3 years now. And somehow here I am, living in a very expensive place in California, and I'm still here.
Yeah, I think it's just so incredible for people to hear, for me to hear, just that unique perspective you live by. That is such a rare lifestyle to live, and it's amazing to hear about how God has provided every single time without fail.
I mean, I can tell you stories like it's not like it's a fairy tale that it all just goes smooth. There's times where our bank account is dropping. And there was one time, I can tell you this, one time my wife was like, our bank account is down to nothing. And this was probably like a year ago. She's like, you got to find a job. And so I went and I prayed and I asked God, is this over? Is this season over? And do I need to go find a job
Mhm.
and stop doing the coaching and the spiritual direction and the deep healing? Is this over? And within 2 days, my wife went to our PO box and texted me and said, just got a check, for $10,000. And I was like, okay, I'll keep going.
Awesome. Yeah. I'm just genuinely excited for, whoever this resonates with. And so just for people to have the ability to go and hear more of your incredible podcasts. And yeah, it's so clear. You just have a gift of speaking and shepherding people. So I just really, really appreciate you sharing just so many good little chunks of wisdom. Mm,
Thanks again for having me.
of course. I'm sure I will have you again in the near future. I
Look
really,
forward to
really
it.
appreciated this conversation.
Yeah, me too. Thank you for the questions you asked.